that works for you, set this up good just in case. Okay, fantastic. So we'll just get right into it, eh?
Yep. Okay. Do you want to start off?
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah. Hello again, everybody. Dennis O'Connor here from Awakening in Health, and I have got a Mr. Mike Holt with me again. This is our third chat now, and the reason I'm interested in kind of talking to him is he's got a lot of very interesting things going on in relation to, I guess, holding the court systems and the legal systems accountable for breaches left, right, and center of more or less human rights. And just for people who haven't tuned into the last few chats I've had with Mike, Mike's had a very interesting and diverse background. And he's found himself investigating something we call common law. And for those of people out there who don't know what that is, common law is a system that supersedes the legal system. And it puts us back in standing in relation to be able to gain our rights. And Mike's found himself on the receiving end of some very, very unfair and harsh decisions. So, Mike, if you want to just do a recap about some of that very quickly, but I'm much more interested in talking to you about the up and coming high court case that you've got on and how that might be handled. But yeah, with a little bit of context for those people who might be new to listening to our conversations, can you just give a brief outline and then get us a bit current on what's happening now?
Yeah, look, this all started around about nearly 4 years ago, and I went down to Melbourne to give evidence in a court case. A friend of mine had been caught up in those terrorist laws, terrorist sweeps in Melbourne. They were, I think they raided 16 people or something. My mate was the only guy that got arrested, and he was on trial. But before he got on trial, for 2 years, they locked him up with no trial, in solitary confinement, 23 hours a day. He couldn't get out. So, I mean, this is just cruel and unusual punishment even before he's been convicted. Now, in Australia, under the Constitution and common law, we are innocent unless proven guilty. And that is the crux of my case down in Melbourne too, which I'll talk about in a moment. Anyway, I went down to Melbourne, and as I arrived, I got a phone call from this guy's lawyer who said, don't come to the Supreme Court where the court case was being held. The judges closed the court. So I said, okay. So I went over to my friend's place and stayed the night. Next morning, I got on the train, and halfway to Melbourne, I get another phone call from the lawyer. Don't come into the court because they've closed the court again. So, okay. So it was too late to go back. So I got there, I met with the lawyer, walked down the street to the side entrance of the Supreme Court. He went on into the courtroom, and I walked into the Supreme Court side entrance and had a look around the Supreme Court library, which somebody had recommended to me. And I was very impressed with that. I love history. And it was very interesting to see all these judges that had passed some very far-reaching laws, and the whole thing was very nice. It was tastefully directed, tasteful decor. And I took some pictures. Then I walked out the side entrance down to the front of the building, took some photos of the front because the Themis statue on top of the Supreme Court is very interesting. Normally, Themis is standing there with the scales in one hand, balanced, and a sword in the other, which means, and also blindfolded. So she's blindfolded, she dispenses justice with the sword, and it's always, supposed to be balanced. This Themis on the Supreme Court building is sitting down, eyes open, and her sword pointing down, and the scales are uneven. And I thought, well, that's a bit strange. So I did some research, and what it means is that you won't get justice in this building. And that's exactly.
So what did you call it? Did you call that a Themis?
Themis, the Lady of Justice is called Themis.
Okay, and I think people might be familiar with that kind of statue you sometimes see outside of those buildings of that lady, as you said, blindfolded with the sword down. Okay, just again for a catch up. So, but you had embarked on, I guess, investigating this common law paradigm for a good number of years before you were called to try and help your friend. Is that right? And just again to add a little bit more context, is that you felt compelled to look into I guess some of the things that didn't make sense in relation to the legal system, whereby people in general are getting hit with fines, they're getting unfair tax bills, they're having their properties taken away from them. I know you've worked with a man called Dick Yardley who bore the full brunt of a really unfair system where he actually got his property taken away from him because he had the temerity to erect electric fences, I think, on that property to protect his farm from flying foxes. And because he didn't get that proper permission, the government just thought it was okay to confiscate his property totally from him. And I gather that you worked with Mike very closely to find out a lot of fundamental errors in the system that have just been thrown upon us, and really we're getting hoodwinked into thinking that all these legalities are in some way lawful and justifiable.
And they're not. I grew up in the 1950s. I came over here from England. I grew up in Brisbane, and I grew up in what they called then the Commonwealth of Australia, which is how it was constituted in 1901 under the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act. So, sorry. So I grew up in that. So I knew what my rights and freedoms were, even if I hadn't had them articulated to me. I felt it in my bones because I lived it. And then when, after I joined the Air Force, I got out in 1972, I think. And that was just when Whitlam got elected. And I saw what he has started to do. And he destroyed the Australia that I knew and brought in a de facto republic. So I started having my doubts about the political system even way back then, but I never understood it because I was too young and I had a lot of other things to do with my life. But after I went up to, after I got out of the Air Force, I traveled around a fair bit, and late 78, I think it was, I arrived in Thailand, and I ended up living up in Thailand for 30 years. And it was a bit of a strange story because when I got there, I only intended to stay maybe 12 months and work, get some more money, and then keep traveling over to England. But in that first 12 months, I met a young lady, and I was about to travel on to England, and she got all upset with me and said, "But I love you and I want to marry you." And I said, So I had to think about it. I mean, I liked her too. I wasn't sure I loved her, but at that stage, but Thailand was very enticing. So I sat there and I thought, now if I stay here, I've got basically three hots. I've got the hot weather, the hot food, and this hot woman. So I decided to stay. I mean, there was nothing really for me in England. It was cold and miserable, and Margaret Thatcher hadn't came in with all her changes yet. But yeah, so I finished up staying there. I lived through 5 coups. And when I came back to Australia, I was just going to retire. I sold my businesses up there and I was going to just kick back and go fishing. But after a year or so, I got tired of that, and I wrote a book about my next door neighbour who was a World War II POW. So that book is on Amazon. You can search for POW 921. And it's an interesting story because he was saved by the atomic bomb, but that we're digressing there. Anyway, 2 years later, Gillard stabbed Rudd in the back and became Prime Minister. And as I said, I lived through 5 coups in Thailand. I know what a coup looks like, and that was a darn coup. There was no guns firing, but it was a coup. So I really started to look into things then, and I soon met up with a chap who had written or been part of a 100-man team who had written a whole new constitution, a draft constitution. So I was very interested in that, and it was the first time I'd actually read a constitution for Australia. It wasn't the one that we have, but it was a new one. And I read that and I thought, well, that's interesting. So then I read the real constitution and compared them. And I started thinking about what we had now in the past and what we have now and so on. And so gradually I realized that we don't actually have a properly constituted government. Whitlam destroyed all that. Bob Hawke put the final nail in the coffin. And ever since then, we've had basically a criminal organization running this country. The corporate government does not have any authority to govern us under our constitution. If you read the constitution carefully, it defines what sort of a government we should have, and this is not it. So that's one of the reasons I went down to Melbourne to try and give evidence in my mate's court case, was just because I could see a wrong being done and I wanted to try and help to correct the wrong. Now, under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and under the Constitution, and under the Magna Carta, and under the English Bill of Rights 1689, we are entitled to the right to freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of movement, and I don't see that in this country. So when I couldn't go and give evidence in my mate's case, I came home and I wrote an article about it. The next day I published it, and then I rang up his lawyer, and the lawyer said, "Oh, you can't write about that court case. There's a suppression order." So I said, "Okay." So I took down the suppression. I took down the article and deleted everything. A year later, I get a visit from 6 cops who come to my house. They walk into my house when I'm not there. They take all my computers, my hard drives, my phone, my documentation, all sorts of things. And then another year later, I get an invitation to court. In other words, I get summoned to court. Well, that was nearly 3 years ago that I got that. And they've been dragging me through their courts ever since. Every few months, they invite me back into what I call the dojo, because that's where we fight. And you know, they have made all these things. They put me on I'm out on bail, which doesn't really mean anything because I'm just living my life normally. The only thing, the bail condition is, if I move house, I have to let them know where I am. Apart from that, it doesn't really bother me. But I was supposed to turn up in court last year in September. And because I have been telling the judges and magistrates all down the line that under Constitution Section 80, they have no jurisdiction in Victoria to try me. So in September last year, I wrote to them and I said, "I won't be there. You can have your trial, but I don't have to be there." And the judge made an order to have me arrested. So the next month, I walked out of my house and there's a half a dozen cops grab hold of me and arrest me and put me in a holding cell in Maroochydore. And then they flew me down to Victoria, threw me in jail for 6 days total. And I only managed to get out on another new bail with more or less the same conditions. And I came home. But on the 3rd of July, which by the time you see this, it'll probably be started or even finished, I am due to go into court. Now, the reason I asked to talk to you today is because yesterday, which is the last day of June, I filed what they call a Form 78B with the court. Now, a Form 78B must be sent to every Attorney General, state and federal, to notify them that I am reporting a possible crime in progress. Now, I'm going to share the screen and I'll show
you. Just before you go on there, I just want to just get a little bit more context there if I can. So really, and this is the way I'm kind of surmising what happens. There's a bigger picture going on here, isn't there? And we saw that you correctly alluded to the incident in Melbourne quite a while back. A few little points that I want to mention that I can pick up on when you're talking are the stabbing in the back. And for people who are listening to this outside of Australia, we essentially ended up on a few different occasions with an unelected government because a coup, as you said, happened, and the person that we voted for was actually overthrown, for want of a better word. And we're seeing these kind of things happening in the UK and some other countries as well now. We're actually having, and that actually is filtering down even in Cairns. I've had a conversation, which you can see on my Awakening and Health BitChute channel and on my YouTube, with 2 women who were responsible for stopping the cashless system being implemented by the council up here in Cairns. And one of the things which I actually was very surprised about that I didn't know about was the mayor is really told what to do by a CEO who is not elected up here. So essentially, we've got this idea that that we think we have a democracy where we have some kind of vote or standing or position where we are in control of what's happening in our communities, but that couldn't be further from the case. And then what I'm seeing in relation to your story, and your story could be considered as medium level compared to what happened with some people who were just simply walking along the beach with a piece of material not on their face, or for example, being I don't know, going outside at the wrong time under the pretext that there was some deadly virus going out there. We've really had just this slew of unlawful and unjust actions by a government that's dubious at best. And the reason I want to put that in there, absolutely, well, I probably tend to agree with you. So the reason I wanted to add that for context is what I see you doing is you're really putting a spotlight on some of that tyranny that really, these people are acting. I don't know what even the word to describe it is. They're just acting in this cavalier manner. They're disobeying laws. They're riding roughshod over people's rights. And so this brings us back to the point in the conversation where you're talking about this form, which is your vehicle, I guess, to say, hang on a second, these acts are, I feel they're criminal, and I want to lodge these. So now to get back onto that point, have I framed that in a way that fits into with that we're up to scratch in the conversation?
Yes, more or less, definitely. We are ruled by a criminal cartel, and that includes not only the politicians but the courts, and of course all the minions underneath them. You mentioned the Constitution there and voting. If you look at section 7 and 21, I think it is. It's the first section in the Senate and the lower house sections of the Constitution. It says right there, only we, the people, have the right and the authority to choose our representatives. It doesn't say anything about political parties. Political parties aren't even mentioned in the Constitution. There is no prime minister mentioned in the Constitution. Where do these people come from? In other words, they have usurped our power, because remember, our Constitution begins, whereas the people. That establishes we, the people of the Commonwealth, supreme over the Parliament. And what the Parliament has done now is they've flipped it on its backside. They've made themselves superior over us and thrown out our laws, our Commonwealth laws. So, yeah, what I'm doing now is and I'm not the first one to do this, Dennis. Other people have put in the same 78B, and every time we do, and I've done it, this is the second time, the Attorney General, who is supposed to be the guardian of all law, ignores it and refuses to have anything to do with it. And I expect
I'll get you just to hold that thought, because this show will probably go onto my radio show next week. So just for anybody listening on that show, by the time people hear this, there could have been a High Court ruling in Mike's case. But we'll just take a brief little pause there, just for the radio producer, just to do what he's got to do, add ads and whatnot. And we'll come back. You're listening to Dennis at Awakening in Health, and I'm talking to Mr. Mike Holt about his challenges, I guess, to the unfairness of a legal system that's really just not doing the right thing in relation to a situation that's going on. So we'll be back very shortly. Welcome back to Awakening in Health, and I'm talking to Mr. Mike Holt, who is due in the High Court in Australia.
No, sorry.
Sorry. Yes, please correct me, Mike.
It's the Melbourne County Court.
The Melbourne County Court, my apologies. And you really feel that the powers that be, or the authorities, are acting in a criminal way, and you now have a form to put them on notice about this criminal behavior. I think that's where we got to with the conversation. So just take us from there, please.
Okay. This is a Form 78B. under the Judiciary Act 1903. And I can notify the Attorney General of each state and the Commonwealth that this proceeding in the County Court of the State of Victoria raises issues of a constitutional nature, affecting every state and territory in respect of the root or radical title to be a subject of the Queen of the Constitution, instead of a conscripted citizen of 3 or more states. Well, the Queen or the King doesn't really make any difference. So the nationally important issues are the state of Victoria and many other states have purported means claim to, but without any legal basis, to abolish the separation of church and state. And since the Judicature Acts have merged church and state in an atheist judge, with split loyalty to 3 different crowns in my case, instead of one, which is the Commonwealth crown under the Great Seal of the Commonwealth, forged and promulgated in 1901 at the formation of the Commonwealth. Now it's alleged, the defendant, that's me, that this is beyond the legislative alleged by the defendant. I'll start that again. Can you edit that bit out?
Yep. It is alleged by the defendant that this is beyond the legislative competence of the state of Victoria, because the state of Victoria and any other state cannot diminish the royal prerogative vested in the Crown by the statute 1 Will and Mary C6 in commas coronation oath end comma 1688.
That's correct. So every since 1688, every king and queen has had to swear an oath before they get the crown. And this king also did the same thing. I don't think he followed the form exactly, but he's still bound to that. And the state of Victoria has said, no, we're not under that. We're making our own rules. And that's the big problem. Now, I won't go into all the details on the 78B, but the fact is, the attorneys general, state and federal, are bound by Clause 5 of the Constitution, which states that every judge and magistrate and member of the Commonwealth is bound to obey the Constitution over and above any state laws. So by refusing to even accept that Constitution Section 80 applies in my case, the judges and even the jury will be breaking the law. Now, the penalty for breaking this law, let me just check here and I'll tell you how much it is. It's pretty bad. It's about, where are we? Well, there we go. Under the Crimes Act and various other things, it's $630,000 for offending against Section 43 of the Crimes Act, and with a penalty of $126,000 to each and every individual per day who willfully fails to accept the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act 1900 and Section 80. Now, to resolve this issue, there must be a trial of that issue, not just me. Now, Section 80 of the Constitution states that if I am accused of committing a crime in Queensland, and terrible crime, I committed a crime of publishing an article here in Queensland. It was published in Queensland. I did the work on my computer in Queensland, and therefore I'm entitled to be tried in Queensland. Section 80 stipulates that. They cannot drag me down to Victoria. Now, when I brought this up in courts in Victoria before on video calls, they kept on saying, but we can't try you in Queensland. And I said, why not? Because we don't have any authority up there, no jurisdiction. I said, not my problem. Why am I here in your Victorian court? Oh, because we've already charged you. Really? It doesn't make sense. So once again, when I go into court on the Monday, which is in a couple of days' time, I will be bringing this issue up first and foremost. They have to resolve this issue. And I don't mean just give me a ruling. They have to resolve the issue. They cannot go ahead with the court case against me. Right?
And yeah. And I think that's very important, Mike, and we've had some of these discussions before, and I talk to people in the common law groups up here in Cairns as well. that a lot of Australians actually don't realize that we do have a very good constitution. And secondly, the Constitution is the document, I guess, that underpins or should underpin our legal system. And the legal system is riding roughshod over that. And I think it's very important for me that there are people like yourself and a number of others who are bringing back some of these decisions and showing how they absolutely contradict some of our rights from the Constitution.
Mm.
And it seems to me that there's a very kind of sinister move on behalf of the court system or the legal system to kind of again just pull the wool over our eyes and for this idea to be in place that they are the authority and on a whim they can just do what they want. And really, if we start allowing this to happen, we are going to be losing, well, we've already lost significant rights everywhere in relation to privacy, in relation to land, in relation to you name it. It's going to be going downhill at a rate of knots if we don't have people like yourself calling some of these rulings into question. And that seems really incredible to me that that on the one hand, they say that you have to be in Victoria in order to answer your charges, because they don't have jurisdiction in Queensland, but they actually are charging you from something you did in Queensland. It's almost like the ends can't meet if they're going to take that position. But if you allow them to get away with that, they are going to throw the book at you without validity, I guess.
Yes. Well, according to them, the charge actually has a 5-year penalty, imprisonment. And I'm innocent. I'm innocent of any crime for a start. They have to prove in court what they call mens rea. Now, mens rea means committing the crime intentionally. Now, I didn't know there was a suppression order until after I'd published the article. So how can I commit a crime intentionally if I didn't even know there was a crime?
But isn't it incredible, Mike, as well, that you've got your bail conditions and you've got this condition, that condition, that we've just lapsed into this kind of heinous situation where you're guilty until you're proven innocent.
Yes.
And I mean, and fundamentally, that is not the way law should work.
No, under the Magna Carta and the common law system, we are all innocent unless proven guilty. Now, do you know what how would you define a contract? A constitution. How would you define a constitution? What is it?
I guess a way of defining rules that societies can use that indirectly relate to God's work, to God's rulings. Might be one way.
More or less. It's actually a workplace contract between we, the people of the Commonwealth of Australia, that's every man and woman in this country, and our public servants, the Parliament, the courts, the police. It governs them. It tells them how they must behave and serve we, the masters. And most people don't even realise we are the masters. And our contract with the Parliament and the government is a very strong one. In fact, when they wrote our constitution, they went around and had a look at various constitutions around the world. And I reckon, I've read the American Constitution, the Polish Constitution, and a few others. I reckon ours is one of the best constitutions in the world because it protects our rights. But these people are ignoring it or attempting to ignore it. I'm going to be shoving it in their faces.
And I've heard you talk about this system before as well. And I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole just because it takes a while to get your head around it, and it's a little bit tricky to specify simply. But really, I love the way you define that. By the way, that the Constitution is a contract between almost the people who serve us and us as the employers, I guess, of these people who are meant to be doing the right thing with us. But essentially, as the owners of the business, for want of a better word, we should be directing what's going on. But if we put ourselves into a position, and this is where we have these contractual terms of being either the beneficiary or the benefactor, we are fooled into thinking we're the beneficiary. And in reality, we should have a position as the benefactors. Could you touch on that slightly? Because I think that's very important for Australian people, and actually people on a global level, to regain their standing as benefactors.
Well, I mean, you've only got to look at it from a contractual point of view. We, the people, have a contract with these politicians who stood there for election and said, we will serve you, right? Don't forget that they are servants, and we pay them, right? So who pays the servant? The master, and therefore it's our right to tell them what to do. Now, the problem is our founding fathers missed that point. When they wrote the Constitution, they made a very big mistake. They gave only the Parliament the right to start a referendum, and only we, the people, the right to amend our Constitution through a referendum. So we have this problem. The very people that we elected to serve us have the power to stop us having a referendum to amend our Constitution and keep them in line. Wow, how about that? So one of the first things I started doing when I realized this, I set up a website called cirnow.com.au. And that website now has dozens and dozens of articles showing the crimes and corruption being committed against we, the people of the Commonwealth, by our public servants. So if you really want to know what happened, go onto that website. You'll see the bird with the two wings, lab, two wings of the same political bird. So what I'm hoping to do with this court case is to get the judge to understand that they are acting unlawfully and throw this case out for a start. But it won't end there. Even if they throw this case out, I have already got, I've already filed a case against these people. I call them the alligators because they made an allegation against me, right? This whole court case is about one allegation. I published an article. Ooh, big crime. So these alligators have already put themselves in jeopardy in law because they had me arrested and kidnapped, transported down to Victoria, thrown into jail for 6 days. Those are crimes, and they're punishable by 17 years imprisonment, which when you liquidate the penalty, and there's about 16 people involved in this, it's well over $1 billion they owe me for the crimes that they have committed against me.
That's quite incredible. We'll take another short break, Mike. You're listening to Dennis O'Connor at Awakening in Health, and I'm talking to Mike Holt, who is a common law researcher who's taken on a very big legal battle about in relation to him publishing an article, and the system wants to see Mike put in jail just for simply publishing an article. So we'll be right back very shortly. Welcome back to Awakening in Health. You are listening to Dennis O'Connor. I am chatting to Mike Holt, who's got a very big court case coming up where he is essentially being threatened with jail for publishing an article in relation to an order that was suppressed. And just before we took this little break here, Mike was talking about one of his websites where we can look at corruption in relation to the government that's going on, and even something that made the news headlines in the last few days is this Gladys Berejiklian woman who was one of the premiers of one of the states in Australia, who was found guilty of corruption. And it looks like there's going to be no repercussions for some huge scandals that have happened in relation to her collaborating with this businessman boyfriend that she had at the time. And yet we see you unwittingly publish an article that was supposedly suppressed, and this system is coming after you, all guns firing, threatening you with 5 years in jail. That just is quite insane when you think about things in that kind of context. Who have you hurt? Whose money have you stolen? Where's the fraud there? And we've got this woman Berejiklian walking around scot-free who's had a negative headline about her. What do you think of that?
Don't worry. She's not going to be walking around for much longer. And a lot of these people, all of these people are going to be held accountable. Why? Because we are now, with our common law assemblies, preparing a common law court. We've already had a grand jury, and the Governor General has been indicted under that grand jury. We're now going to convene a common law court, and we're going to start calling these people into court. Now, whether they turn up or not is irrelevant, because they will all try to ignore it. Criminals try to get away, but it won't help them, because enough people now are waking up and they are angry enough that they want justice. So the common law court will give us that justice. So no matter what happens to me, it's too late for the criminals. We know who they are and we're coming after them.
I think it's important that people are aware of this common law setup, which should be really the main structure of how we go about doing lawful work. And the way I have to describe to people is it's the difference, if you look at the American structure of the sheriff system versus the police system over there. And the sheriff system essentially is a much more sophisticated and more advanced common law structure than we have in Australia. And really, if enough people are awake to the fact that they have much more control than they're led to believe because of the indoctrination of colleges and in schools and whatnot, if enough people really get behind this movement here, we could have a lot more power than we think, and we can actually have the potential to call these people towards justice.
Well, you've only got to look at the American War of Independence from the Brits in 1776, or whenever it was. What happened before that? A lot of people say, oh, that war started with a shot heard around the world. No, it started long before that, when King George started taxing the colonists unfairly. And the colonists were quite happy to pay tax, but not when they had no direct representation, and King George wouldn't give it to them. And we're in the same position now. We're forced to pay tax, but we do not have any direct representation. So what happened in America? Well, first of all, people started having town hall meetings, which we are now starting to organise. And our assemblies are a part of that. We've got over 60 assemblies around Australia and New Zealand already, and it's growing. So each assembly is now starting training how to set up a common law court. We're training up sheriffs, and I've made a whole bunch of courses, which you can find on the website, commonlaw.earth. And you can go and buy these courses for $25, some nominal fee, but that money goes back into supporting the work that we do to promote common law. Now, because we're teaching people how to take responsibility for themselves and their community, these common law courts will start springing up. And when they do, they will start putting these people in jail where they belong. Why do I know that? Well, if you read the Police Powers Act, it actually states in there that if a court, and that is any court, issues a summons or a conviction, then you can take it down to the police, and they are bound by law to act on that conviction. They have to go and arrest the guy. So we do actually have the power of their law again with us, whether they like it or not. But we're going to have problems with the police because they're so brainwashed, they don't even realize what powers we have. So it's going to take a little bit of hard work, but I can assure all of our Australian mates, we are going to do it. We are doing it. We're pretty prepared for it, and we're ready.
And I think there's enough signals globally, Mike. I mean, you just have to look at what's happening in France now. That was really the outcome of what we're seeing now as a result of appalling, and I use the word very loosely, leadership with these horrible people who are at the helm of government over there. And we're seeing France and Paris, one of the supposedly best cities in the world, just burning. I was over there a few years back, and it's a horrible, grotty city. You're seeing cars getting burned. You're seeing people dragged out of their cars, getting severely injured. You know, again, same things happening in my country, in Ireland. We're being victimized by people who are taking their orders from Europe. And I think there's a bigger picture here as well, Mike. I don't know if you agree with me, but I see this, I describe it as a very insidious Marxist agenda that seems to really come from historically, at the very least, the early 1900s, late 1800s, which really is about just destroying society. What do you feel? Do you think we are at war?
Oh, we've been at war for a long time. We just haven't had it declared to us, and most people are unaware of it. But the governments of the world have declared war on us. People like Bill Gates has declared war on us, George Soros, and all these other members of the World Economic Forum, led by Klaus Schwab. Now, before it was the World Economic Forum, it was something else, and it was something else, but it's always been there for the last 200, 250 years. And if you look at history here in Australia and in England, there's a group called the Fabians. Now, you can find out more about them by Googling, but you'll also find them on my website, cirnow.com.au. And the Fabians have insinuated themselves, they're a communist, a bunch of communists, right? They have insinuated their people, after brainwashing them, into all of our systems, including legal, government, social, everything. What do you think all this gay stuff is, all this trans rubbish? It's all coming from what I call the mother weffers, WEF weffers. So, you know, you've got to make fun of these people because they really are very stupid people. They're not that smart. They think they are, but they forget one very simple thing. There's only a few of them in comparison to the rest of us. And if you look through history, what happens to tyrants every time in history?
They usually fall, don't they? Yep.
They always fall. By the way, who put the 7 bullets in Mussolini?
Who was that?
Well, it was 20,000 Italian sharpshooters.
There you go. There you go. And something as well, like as you mentioned, this agenda, the disruption of our normal views about sexuality and what it means to be a man and a woman, which I refer to a lot. And I'm sure I've heard enough of your talks to think that you would have a very good opinion on this also, is the fact that our last names are our corporation names. They're not our God-given names. So this is this really, as a man or a woman, we have inalienable rights. But if we are neither a man nor a woman, in other words, non-binary, we are deferring any of those rights over to the state. And this is very, very dangerous. It's a way of, another way of diminishing our real power and our sovereignty, isn't it?
It is. And unfortunately, these things always rebound back on those who try them. And you know, I mean, you've only got to look at what happened at the end of World War II. All of those criminals got put on trial, and a lot of them got hung. And I think the same thing is going to happen here in Australia. I get phone calls and emails from people every day. The government took my children. The government took my land. The government's fining me thousands of dollars. The government took my car. The government did this. The government did that. Now, I was talking to some people a while back, and I said, you know, you always hear people asking, why doesn't the government do something? The government has, and they are. They're destroying us. And it's time for we, the people, to stand up united, understand our rights, and take back our government. And if that takes blood, then so be it, because they have brought it on themselves. I'm not advocating that. I want to do it legally. I want to do it lawfully. And I think we can do it using our laws and the common law courts. But I can't speak for everyone. And I know there's a lot of hotheads out there who'd like to take it a lot further. Please don't, because you'll only harm what we're trying to do. Okay. But the fact is, history has a way of repeating, and who knows what can happen in the near future. But I think they've pushed enough Australians to the wall now that it's going to be very dangerous for them. And people like Berelikian and Palachuk, the Queensland Premier, they can run, but they can't hide. We will get them and hold them accountable.
Now, a lot of people who are working in government positions, they are not, I think, our enemies. They are just under a system that they're obliged to comply with because they've signed the regulations, they're getting their paycheck. But on a broader level, do you think the government is the enemy of the people?
Well, you asked me that before. Sorry. Yeah. We have to cut that bit out. Down the wrong way. You asked me that before, Dennis, and I said, yes, the government declared war on us ages ago. Whitlam exacerbated it, but they'd been doing it for years. As soon as federation was done, you know, we became a federation of states rather than 6 independent colonies. the political parties swung into gear and they started taking down our system even before people realized what we had. But it took Bob Hawke and Whitlam to really turn the screws down hard. So yeah, we're at war. And what do we do at war? We fight to win.
I think you're right, Mike. Listen, we are going to wrap it up now, but thank you very much again for joining me. And I think we've got more talking to be done after you have your court case, because I think a lot of people, including myself, are going to be very interested to see how you go with tackling those wrongs, I think, that are being kind of done against yourself. And again, I really have to take my hat off to you for making that stand, because what you're doing will set precedents, I guess, for other people who are going to have those things that are being done in the wrong way against them. So I think there's going to be a lot of people fascinated by your journey. Mr. Mike Holt, thank you very much for speaking to me. My name is Dennis O'Connor, and you are listening to Awakening in Health, and I look forward to bringing you some more information very soon.
Thank you.
Mike, thank you very much for your time, man.
Okay, bye now.
Okay, bye.